Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Permanent Values Part 1, highlighting some of the values which define the structure of Deen. These are the references. There is a chapter in What is Islam. We should look at that. There are permanent values listed there and explained as well, some of them. Islam, a challenge to religion. These permanent values are given towards the end under conclusion. And this is our contact. In case anyone has a question or any comment, they can get in touch through this WhatsApp number. An overview of today's presentation. The Quran, while providing the guidance, notes a number of permanent values together with the divine attributes, knowledge of which is essential for the human self-development. And that is important. If we want to develop ourselves, then we simply cannot avoid knowing these permanent values. When grasped within the context of the system of Deen, these values enhance human understanding and expand our vision, which is essential to come to grips with the finer aspects of the human psyche. These values serve as external criteria both individually as well as collectively to make choices and decisions in our earthly life. These values are applicable to all human beings for all times and are immutable, i.e., they are never going to change, and they act as laws in relation to the human self. When they are followed as per the guidance of the Quran, then they start to manifest their effects, firstly on the human self and then in the outer world. The Islamic system of Deen will function within the broad domain of these permanent values and will formulate sub-clauses through mutual consultation to meet the needs of the era in which this system becomes established. And that's a very delicate and a very refined point, and hopefully that will become clear once we go through all these values. In this presentation, some of these values are outlined in a summarized form. Brief introduction. What I've done over here is, as a premise, I've gone through some salient points that what is the importance of relative values and permanent values and how these relate to human self and the human body. All man-made systems are based on relative values or man-made laws which are not only not permanent but vary from one country to another. And we witness it in today's world that every country has its own values. Sometimes people say these are American values. These are British values. These are European values. And in the Islamic world, they say these are Islamic values. And of course, every sect has its own values. Even within one country, there are different laws and values, which essentially means that the same person traveling from one part of the planet to another part is subject to different laws. And this is a gross injustice according to the Quran. And this is something which we should come to grips as we go through all these values. Since man possesses the traits of choice and intent, hence he has no inner guidance, which means that in order to live an orderly, social, communal life, the society should have some laws and values in place in order to carry out its daily affairs. Because in a collective life, we need some kind of standards, some kind of values, some guidelines to make the society function in an orderly fashion. Under the man-made systems, these laws and values are the product of unbridled human desires and intellect. When we say unbridled, it means that everyone follows their own desires. And if they are kept within the values of the society, it is by force rather than human desire. And that is why these values or laws which are implemented by human systems, these are forced onto human beings. Most people do not follow them willingly. This leads to conflicts and imbalances in the world, with every country having its own set of laws and values which keep changing. This creates uncertainty within each nation as well as across the world. And we can see that uncertainty. For example, American power influences a lot of countries in the world. And whenever there is a change of president, there is more uncertainty created in those countries which are influenced by American power. The Quran has provided guidance as an external criterion for mankind and has invited mankind to study its value system, and if it appeals to them, then they can adopt it and accrue all those benefits which are associated with obeying these laws and values. And that is an interesting part, that where our Quran says, do like this, it also gives the wisdom behind it. It also gives the reason that why should you do it. It gives that rationale on which that law, value, principle is based. All man-made systems are based on this assumption that human life ends with death. And that is a huge difference between the system of Deen and man-made system. Continuing, all human systems have some values. These permanent values do not become apparent by merely reading the Quran, and that is a very important point we should keep in mind. I also learned it quite late, that we have to concentrate, we have to look for it. It requires focused attention with the aim of studying it as a system of Deen, which is meant to replace man-made systems. This means that we should be generally aware of the relative values and man-made laws of the man-made systems in order to become attracted by the permanent values of the Book of Allah. Because human beings like to compare. For example, when we go to the supermarket, we want to compare prices as well. So all our life, all human outlook is based on doing comparison, and it is better, and that is called judgment. So that is why it is important that we know what are the limitations of man-made systems, and of course the strength as well, and then compare this with the permanent values of the Book of Allah. Having become aware of the values and laws on which man-made systems are based, the next step is to become dissatisfied with these systems. And obviously we cannot become dissatisfied unless we are affected by them and we study them and then do the comparison. And the Quran calls this step as وَمَنْ يَكْفُرْ بِالطَّاغُوتِ وَيُؤْمِنْ بِاللَّهِ. And this is from verse 256 of Surah Al-Baqarah, i.e. reject the system of Taghut. All man-made systems are Taghut because these transgress the limits laid down by the Quran and its values, and then have Iman in Allah. This aspect will become clear later. The Quran itself is a permanent value, as it tells us from the beginning to the end that if the human system is managed according to its guidance, that is by addressing the Jamaat-e-Mu'mineen, then in this system not only will physical needs be met satisfactorily, it will also cater for human self-development, which is linked to the life of the hereafter. And the important point in this term satisfactory is that those human beings who have accepted Iman, they will themselves realize that their needs are being met in a satisfactory way because they are concentrating more on the human self, and the physical needs, of course, are important, but once these are met, then all efforts should be directed towards developing their self. Continuing, need for understanding the procedure. It warns us that if the human system is based on unbridled desires, that is unguided, then this system will only meet physical needs, that too in an extremely unbalanced way. In such a system, their yatim and miskeen will exist in great numbers, together with chaos, conflicts, wars, fear, and grief. And we can see that across the world of 2024. The Quran then informs us that for the establishment of the system of Deen, the existence of a Jamaat-e-Mu'mineen is absolutely essential. And these Mu'mineen are not born, but become this through their own choice and free volition. And that holds the crux to understanding the Quran, that Mu'mineen are not born, they do not come descending from the heavens. These ordinary human beings who are born biologically, they have to make a choice and become Mu'mineen. So aim of, for example, this platform is to awaken that desire to become Mu'mineen. In order to become these Mu'mineen, the Quran lays down the precise procedure and process through which they have to pass their own selves before the next stage of acquiring power in the land arrives. So there is no point in asking for power from Allah and not being ready for that. Over here, the procedure is first we have to get ready, then the power as a consequence of becoming ready comes to us, and that is according to the law of Allah. All aspects of this process of forming a Jamaat-e-Mu'mineen have to go through a well-planned, organized, and managed procedure. and this is signposted by the Quran clearly, thus providing guidance to the Jamaat-e-Momineen. For this, the Quran has presented various human models as the messengers of Allah, elaborating various stages of Deen. When we present the message of the Quran to others, after grasping its various aspects ourselves, then gradually those people are attracted who may either be looking for guidance or may find some attraction in its message in terms of solving human problems. So the first stage is people should get attracted towards this message. But if they have listened it, heard about it, read about it, but not attracted by it, they are of no use to the system of Allah. Tolu Islam being the only movement or organization which has done the groundwork on all aspects of the fundamentals of the system of Deen. At least people or the members within Tolu Islam generally know what Deen is and how this is different from the man-made systems. Many people become attracted by its literature, lectures, videos, audios, social media forums, etc., and also come across its motivated and dedicated members who are ever ready to share their understanding about Islam as a system of Deen. And we witness it. If someone comes to someone from Tolu Islam and he asks for a book, we go out of the way to supply that book, and at times we don't even charge them with that. However, this work of spreading the message through social media and interpersonal communication is not sufficient for the system of Deen of the Quran. And that is an important sentence which I put down over here through my own experience. Merely passing on the message is not enough, because through that we do get some numbers who get interested in it across the world. But next point is very important. While this work is continuing, the next stage is to recognize those individuals who could become Mu'mineen and part of one Jamaat whom the Quran has addressed as Ya ayyuhallazina amanu, O Jamaat-e-Mu'mineen. So wherever this term appears in the Quran, we should keep in mind that it is about the system of Deen, that this Jamaat has already been created, and that is why they are being addressed. If those are not there, then this is something which needs to exist before they can be addressed and do what is given in those verses. The question which arises here is how to proceed further with this task. Next is preparing for the next phase. This task has become relatively easier due to the platforms like Zoom, because previously people have to come together physically at some place, and that was difficult because of the man-made system. If such individuals, by coming forward, present themselves for education, training, and self-development for the system of Deen, then this can be organized and conducted in a formal way. However, this education and training will demand patience, steadfastness, and solid deeds, and never be distracted. Once people come to this path and they have made this choice that we are going to educate ourselves, train ourselves, and develop ourselves, then they have to fully focus on raising the standard of their own self. That is by reading through the books, studying them intricately, and then discussing it so that these things become their second nature. And that is where knowledge of permanent values is extremely important. Its first step will be to accept Iman in exactly the way that the Quran has described in detail, not thinking that I've got Iman. And I'm sure if I've got Iman, I should be able to explain to others through references by quoting the Quran. Without quoting the Quran, just saying that, oh, I believe in Allah, that is meaningless. That is of no use to the Quran and for the establishment of the system of Deen. When these Mu'mineen come together, then their education will be the first phase, in which details will be provided about various aspects of the human self and the need for the system of Deen. Because if we do not know why system of Deen is needed, then essentially we haven't got onto this path called Sirat-e-Mustaqim, because there is nothing to do Mustaqim. Mustaqim means balanced and established. We have gone through this term in chapter 1. Since the Quran notes various aspects of the human psyche, thus these will be discussed in a frank and forthright manner. The permanent values and divine attributes will be the basic constituents of this education and training. By acting on this, the self of the mu'mineen will grow and develop. And this growth and development is not otherworldly. We ourselves become witness in the light of the Quran, using it as an external criterion that I have grown, I have developed. My level of understanding has expanded. I am a better human being than what I used to be. And I am in a clear position to reject the man-made system, and I am going towards the system of Deen together with others. And then these mu'mineen with developed selves will start to function together as a unit, an initial seed for the system of Deen. Finally, this Jamaat-e-Mu'mineen will have to keep in mind that they have to carry out those duties in the human world which Allah has asked them to do, for which the guidance is noted in the book. With this premise, now we go to the first value of today's presentation, the human self, and it is the first permanent value. Though all permanent values are important, however, the permanent value of the existence of the human self is the most important, as all other values draw their significance from this value. Every human child comes into the world through a biological path with a self which has the inherent trait of choice and intent. Because we interact in the world through this human self, our intellect, our reasoning, our emotions, our desires, and our sense of identity, everything is directed towards meeting the needs of our body as well as of the self, in case we have come to the Quran. So human self is the focus of our attention and should be focus of our attention, and we should always be aware of it, that I possess a self. The Quran has called this self as nafs, which is the manifestation of divine energy that is called ruh and is invisible. It's worth looking at this term nafs in Lughatul Quran. The Quran has declared, وَخَلَقَ اللَّهُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ بِالْحَقِّ وَلِتُجْزَى كُلُّ نَفْسٍ بِمَا كَسَبَتْ وَهُمْ لَا يُظْلَمُونَ. And over here I have highlighted nafs as well, nafsin bima kasabat, that whatever it does in its life on this planet. It is through this nafs that we as human beings give meaning to this whole visible universe. The meaning of the verse is that Allah created the heavens and the earth bil haq. That is, bil haq means for a positive outcome, for constructive results. So heavens and the earth are created for good, for bringing out haq. And if we see batil in the world, it is because there is no Jamaat-e-Mu'mineen in the world. وَلِتُجْزَى, so that everyone can get the recompense of nafs. And imagine, it is not the body, it is not human body as is mentioned here, it is his self. So that every self gets the recompense of what it does. So our deeds are extremely important. And of course, with the intentions with which we do those deeds, which is based on Iman, is the starting point. And then Quran says, Wahum la yuzlamun, the system is so comprehensive, so intricate, so refined that nobody can be treated unjustly, which also means the system of Deen will also not treat anyone unjustly. And that will be one of the permanent values, which we will discuss later. The recognition of this process of accountability is at the core of human choice and intent. And this aspect will be expanded under the permanent value of the law of requital. The Quran throws light on various aspects of the behavior and conduct of this self of man, and fundamentally its addressee is this nafs. Since the human self is to have another life in the hereafter after physical death, hence this self will fall under the domain of a permanent value, while the human physical body will be covered under a relative value, as it has to remain behind in this physical world after doing this job. And very important, if we haven't recognized that we have a self which is accountable, then essentially, even if we are reading the Quran, we will miss all important aspects which are related to human self. Expanding it further, that is the concept of human self. The human self, which functions through the cognitive ability of thinking, reasoning, analyzing, planning, organizing, making choices and decisions, and acting in the physical world, is provided with certain latent potentials. And that is an important aspect here, latent potentials. And the question we should ask is, before coming to the Quran and after coming to the Quran, that have I brought out my potentials or not? Have I brought out everything which possibly I can benefit in this life or not, and what else is lying within us. And then we will come to the Quran and see how much more is there within us which needs to be brought out. There are certain potentials which man uses to live life without the guidance of the Quran. For example, education, training, raising a family, social interactions, doing a job, running a business, political and social matters. So all that which human beings are doing without the guidance of the Quran in the world, all those are human potentials which they are bringing out by using their body, by looking at the mechanistic concept of life. And Quran is asking us to go beyond that, to rise higher than that. For the manifestation of these potentials, man uses the relative values of the man-made systems, and this mode of living is based on this premise that human life comes to an end with death, and there is nothing beyond this physical death. The self to which the Quran draws our attention never enters their kind of thinking and living. Most human beings who are not exposed to the Quranic concept of the human self live life at an animalistic level, and this is not what I am saying, it is as per the Quran. However, under the concept of the human self put forward by the Quran, each human child is endowed with certain potentials, some of which can only manifest under the guidance of the Quran. These are those potentials which are related to those human abilities of his which are required to develop his self in order to come to grips with the higher purpose of life for which human beings have been created. So we should look at children in the light of the Quran that they have far more potentials than those potentials which come out through the man-made system and its relative values. And we will look at the relative values of today's world, some of those once we finish off with these permanent values. The issue of divine energy and human self. The Quran has pointed to a number of human frailties, weaknesses, and limitations which lead to the creation of problems and imbalances in the world. In order to overcome these human frailties, the Quran offers its service as an external criterion and tells us that this guidance is available to those who seek it, i.e., to those who make this deliberate choice. Without making this choice, man lives earthly life without even recognizing the existence of a self within him, and hence the issue of self-development does not even arise. Next point is the term divine energy or ruh requires some further clarification. There is manifestation of energy everywhere in the universe, and we are aware of some of these kinds of energies. For example, electricity, sunlight, these are also energies. But this energy manifests itself through physical cause and effect. This is referred to as energy of matter. In the case of man, there is another energy which manifests itself through his choice and intent. This energy is far more powerful than material energy, as material energy is subservient to it. Because the human energy, that is of choice and intent, is the one which is supposed to regulate, utilize all these energies in the visible universe. In order to differentiate this energy from material energy, Allah has related it as being from Himself. So this is an extremely important asset within us. And once we come to the Quran, then we will see that human beings, how they apply this to creating a system which makes us free from all kinds of fears and anxieties and illusions. Further reflections on human self, and termed it as Ruhana, and this is what is known as the human self. For this, we use the term divine energy. It should be made clear that the human self is not part of the divine self. There are certain religious aspects in which human beings think as if human being is part of the divine self. A self has its own integrity, its own unity. It can never be part of any other self. It is a complete unit. And second is, divine self is fully developed. It is infinitely developed, whereas human self is developing. So these two simply cannot be part of each other. Every self has its own unity and integrity wherever it may be. The human self centered around I retains its sense of identity despite the physical body aging with the passage of time. And we can check it. At any point in time, We know we exist, and there is a very strong sense of self within each one of us. And if we look at our thought process, we will see that we stay young throughout our life at self's level. It is only by looking at the mirror we realize that we are growing old. This is that I on which the changes occurring in the human body do not leave any impact. Very important point, and we can check it ourselves. All of man's deeds, whether these are the desires of his heart or tangible actions, leave imprints on his self. And we can check that as well, particularly once we come to the Quran, where we become very alive, very conscious of our thoughts and deeds. We will see that these things affect our self. The human self manifests these imprints through its brain. This is called memory, and we can recall it. The purpose of human creation and life is the development of the human self. That is to give us new life. And that is why human beings are created. And that is why this is what Quran does. It helps us to create that new life. First, it defines it for us, and then it says this is how to create it. And so once we have created it, then we come to this realization that how important it is to follow the permanent values of the Quran. This is the very responsibility of the Islamic society, which is created by Jamaat-e-Momineen, i.e. to provide an environment based on permanent values to meet physical needs as well as to provide opportunities for self-development. Those individuals who wish to be pioneers on this path of establishing the system of Deen need to develop their selves after coming together so that the law of assigning power by Allah, which is, for example, noted in 2455, can provide help to achieve this goal. Now we go to the next value, respect for humanity or respect as a human being. Since every human child is born with a self, therefore being human, this child becomes deserving of inherent respect and dignity. The Quran points to this fact by saying or declaring, وَلَقَدْ كَرَمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ, that surely we have given respect to every child of Adam. This respect and dignity is a permanent value and cannot be violated under any circumstance. Because if I violate this permanent value, I'm essentially negating my own existence. I'm actually going against my own inherent respect and dignity. The society in which this value is violated turns into a living hell, as this violation ultimately leads to decline and self-destruction. This permanent value leads to establishing once and for all in the society this fact that all human beings are equal as they all possess the same self. Since human beings are born with the feelings of self-awareness or consciousness and have a strong sense of identity built around their own worth and value, hence any word, action, innuendo, offense, humiliation, insult, etc. may lead to affecting their self and its worth. The Quran has warned us regarding this aspect by saying, وَإِذَا قَالُوهُمْ أَوْ وَزَنُوهُمْ يُكْسِرُونَ, but when they have to give or weigh, men give less than what is due. And over here it's very important, وَزَنُوهُمْ, that is when they weigh other human beings, they weigh them less than their worth. The existence of yatim and miskeen in any society means that this permanent value is being contravened and violated as long as human beings exist in this state. Now, next value is the concept of Allah. Together with the human self, the concept of Allah noted in the Quran also becomes a permanent value. The concept of Allah put forward by the Quran is based on fact, that is, Allah exists. He does not exist because I want to believe that he exists. And there is a precise concept of Allah which is given in the Quran, and we will cover this in more detail once we come to divine attributes. And through this concept, the being of Allah based on divine attributes, which are called in Arabic Asma'ul Husna, becomes a model for self-development for man. For the human self to develop further, it needs a higher self as a model. And this is where we need to come to terms with the concept of Allah as an objective standard for man. In relation to Deen, this holds the key to the establishment of the system of Deen. because human beings tend to follow others, they tend to copy others. And that is why, if we look at particularly educated people, you will see that they will always talk about some model of theirs. Some will have their parents, some will have their teachers, some will have their bosses. Whereas Quran says that do not have any human being as your model. The model should be the concept of Allah, which is given in the Quran and which is based on His divine attributes and is a permanent value, so that if we accept and understand that concept of Allah, then our self will keep developing even after we die. The system of Deen is established by the Jamaat-e-Mu'mineen on behalf of Allah based on the Quran, and this means that all those responsibilities which Allah has attributed to Himself are meant to be carried out by the government established in His name. And over here I will say that if we have not acquired that concept of Allah which is given in the Quran, then essentially we have not become that mu'min to whom Allah has promised to help. So it is important that we understand this concept of Allah and then give it space within our psyche so that He becomes our model. And that is important, and these things will become more clear as we go through these permanent values. The divine attributes which appear in the Quran convey some important aspect of various issues noted in various verses. Even those attributes which are specific to the being of Allah, for example, He is the first and the last, are to be comprehended by the Jamaat-e-Mu'mineen in order to strengthen their Iman. And that is important, because if I know that the concept of Allah, which has become my model, is going to be there all the time, then that provides an added strength to our psyche. The concept of Allah, expanding it further. The fundamental premise on which we need to focus is the change in the human psyche in order to rise to transform the outer world. Man is created to generate a new life within him. In order to construct a new world on the planet, the hallmark of which is the absence of all kinds of fears and griefs. Hence, we need to concentrate on two things. What kind of psyche do human beings have devoid of the guidance of the Quran? And what kind of transformed psyche do we acquire through the Quran? That is, we should be able to compare two states. That is, before coming to the Quran, what kind of thinking we had, and now what has happened to our thinking, how it has become eminent and lofty and gone to a higher state. Allah is the fountainhead of all kinds of life in the universe, and this includes man also. He is alive, not that someone has given him life and he gives life. One of his attributes is Al-Hayyul Qayyum, i.e. alive and established. Hence, when this concept is given a place in our psyche, this leads to acquiring that life which develops our thought processes and expands our vision. This is a very important paragraph. We should go through it a few times in order to come to grips with it. Without this concept finding a place in our psyche, this means that we focus solely on the material and physical side of our existence. And this literally means no life. Because if we are concentrating on the mechanistic side of life and do not even recognize our own self, then essentially with death we have nothing in the hereafter. We lived a life just like animals, came here and went through meeting our needs and then died. Such an outlook simply cannot develop ourselves along those lines to which the Quran draws our attention from beginning to the end. This might appear very harsh, but this is a fact. And in order to understand this fact, we have to acquire a new life within us and develop ourselves. Because the whole thing is revolving around the development of human self and acquiring new life according to the Quran. Ranks according to deeds, and that is our next permanent value. All human beings are equal with respect to their birth, but later their ranks will be defined according to their deeds, not by wealth, status, nationality, color, nature of job. The term which the Quran has used for this aspect is muttaqi. Muttaqi is he who is best in conforming to the laws of Allah and who avoids the pitfalls of life. That means he should know what are the pitfalls of life and then start working to avoid them. And that is how Muttaqi optimizes his life and his self-development. This will include physical as well as permanent values. For this, the Quran has stated, Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum innallaha alimun khabir. The most honored among you in the sight of Allah is the one who manifests the most taqwa, and Allah is alim and khabir. So over here, when we say taqwa, and that is becoming a muttaqi, it means to carry out those tasks which the Quran is asking us to carry those out. And that is what muttaqi means. It is not some kind of a worldly status which people get. The Quran has explained all the requisite traits of the muttaqeen, that is in a collective form, together with mu'mineen, salihin, and muhsineen. So these are various aspects of the same individuals. By mentioning two divine attributes of Alim and Khabir, the Quran has guided us, saying that the system should be aware of these people. So all these people who become muttaqi and claim to manage the system of Deen should be knowledgeable and should be aware of everything. That means they need a lot of education and training for themselves. The system should lay down the criteria for muttaqeen and then organize education and training at a basic level and make this part of the national curriculum. Those who have acquired a very high level of understanding and made it a part of their self need to be recognized and should be given higher responsibilities. And once such people have prepared themselves, they are educated and trained, they should themselves also come forward and say that I'm here to carry out all these responsibilities. Just like Messenger Yusuf, when he went to the king and told him that I'm qualified enough to reorganize your country. Ranks according to deeds, elaborating this further. The question which comes to our mind is that this selection within the system of Deen is easy to understand. But what about getting these muttaqeen when the system is not yet in place? For example, in 2024, there is no system of Deen anywhere in the world. What do we need to do? For this, the Quran provides guidance by stating that those who are dissatisfied with the man-made systems need to first accept Iman as noted in the Quran. This is the phase of seeking guidance, and then expand our vision to understand the man-made system and then reject it conceptually in its entirety, even if we are the beneficiaries of the system. And this is what we are trying to do on this platform. The next phase is to understand the salient features of the system of Deen, and the literature and materials available from Tolu Islam will help to understand its finer details. This effort will take us to the next phase, where we will join those as a consequence of inner transformation in our psyche who are also on this path. Those who have come together like this need to educate, train, and develop their self by staying together. This will become the collective phase, and this is where patience, perseverance, and steadfastness acquired by accepting Iman will play its role. This nucleus will serve as the first seed for the system of Deen. The next value is the law of requital. This is also a permanent value. Human self-development takes place when man becomes aware of the functioning of the law of requital. Being aware of one's accountability and its importance leads to a higher self-awareness, which expands the horizon of our vision. We become aware of our choices and decision-making and their consequences. And when we talk of consequences, it is both short and long term. The Quran explains the working of this law both at the individual level as well as the collective level. The rise and fall of nations is tied to the working of this law 24/7. The law is not meant to create any fear and apprehension. It helps to remove fear, because knowing the details of any law helps us to remain on guard, to remain vigilant, and not to do those things which bring ourselves down. But its proper understanding enhances human abilities and helps to bring out our latent potentials. This law forms the foundation of the system of Deen, and its education and training helps prepare that psyche at a fundamental level which simply does not need any police and surveillance to monitor human behavior and conduct. And this law we should keep in mind when we are studying the Quran, because a lot of places Quran deals with cause and effect. All human systems of monitoring and accountability are based on physical means of operation. For example, the need for police, surveillance devices, courts, witnesses, spying. With the awareness of the law of requital, the need for these systems disappears or is minimized. Of course, need for police and others will never be eliminated because everyone is not going to accept Iman even within the system of Deen. But at least those who have become Mu'mineen, they will not require to be observed and surveilled. And this is an important phase of becoming muttaqi, as this leads to exploring those parts of the human psyche which otherwise remain hidden from our sight, for example, our weaknesses and strengths. The law of requital, expanding it further. Together with this law is the law of respite related to the human self. There is an interval between the time we commit a deed and for its effects to show up in our life. Though the imprint of our deed is immediate on ourselves, the physical appearance of its effect may take some time to materialize. This is more applicable to nations and their rise and fall. But in the case of individuals as well, for example, the efforts which we are making now to understand and come to grips with the system of Deen, these will show up at some later point in our life, either on this planet or in the hereafter. So that is the law of respite, that between cause and effect, there is a gap. The Quran puts repeated emphasis on doing salih deeds after accepting Iman. And the reason for this is that through these deeds, not only does our self keep developing and acquiring eminence and greater vision, these deeds also send forward their effects, which accumulate when we come together and move ahead on this path. And that is also important, particularly for people who are young, that they should come to the Quran, follow its permanent values, and even if the system does not get established in their lifetime, they will have a better life in the later part of their existence on this planet, and of course in the life of the hereafter, because they will develop their self, acquire that new life within them. The first effect of this process is the disappearance of differences, leading to the creation of unity, and then the next phase of the uniting of hearts arrives. The firm conviction in the functioning of this law leads to avoiding any distractions on this path and staying firmly together, as we know that this law will never let us down, i.e., developing conviction by following it. Now, next important value, that is permanent values, is physical death, another permanent value. I included it because we know that all those who are born are going to die at some point in time, and it's worth looking at it in the light of the Quran. Every human being entering the world through a biological process has a physical body, and this physical body has a finite time to live. That which is called death defines the end of its journey in this world. That is, this is the end of one phase of life, according to the Quran. Being conscious of this fact is part of the development process of the human self. Hence, death, which is universal, is a permanent value. The Quran factually noted this by saying, Kullu nafsin zaikatul maut, that every self, nafs, will taste death. And it also could mean experiencing death. There is an important aspect noted here, i.e., every self should develop to that level of eminence where not only should the fear of death disappear, but through Iman and Salih deeds, a strong expectation should be built up for the next phase of life. For example, Quran says, Man amila salihan min zakarin aw unsa wa huwa mu'minun falanuhiyannahu hayatan tayyibatan. That is, those who do Salih deeds, whether man or woman, and they should be mu'min. Quran says that they will be given a new life, a life which is tayyib. Tayyib means an extremely successful life in every respect, free from all kinds of fear and huzn. The next part of the verse states, وَإِنَّمَا تُوَفَّوْنَ أَجُورَكُمْ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ فَمَنْ زُحْزِحَ عَنِ النَّارِ وَأُدْخِلَ الْجَنَّةَ فَقَدْ فَازَ. The word faz is very important, that they achieve it through their own efforts. On the day of Qiyamah, shall you be paid your full recompense. Only he who is saved far from the fire and admitted to Jannat will have achieved success. This demonstrates the importance of making correct choices willingly in the light of the guidance of the Quran. Expanding it further, through the consciousness of death, we become aware about three things. Firstly, physical death means that this body has a finite defined time here in the world, i.e., this body is available to our eye for a limited time. Secondly, Since there is a defined finite life of our body, hence we need to take full advantage of this ajal, our period of respite, and through the recipe of iman and saleh deeds, not only acquire new life, but to take it as high as possible so that our eye enters the next phase of life at the highest possible level. This includes coming together and uniting our hearts. Obviously, this is not possible without making an effort within the guidance of the Quran. Since death ends our physical life and its time of arrival is dependent on physical laws, for example, balanced diet, exercise, environment, medical facilities of the man-made systems, etc. Therefore, we need to strive to live as long as possible in good health, so that humanity can benefit from our efforts of iman and saleh deeds. Mutually reminding is part of living life under the shadow of this law. A few more points of interest. The Quran has cast light on death in a number of verses and has recognized the uncertainty and fear created by the thought of death. Being a biological entity, there is a sense of self-preservation kept within us, and we also wish to remain alive for as long as possible. So there are two aspects. One is our sense of self-preservation and our desire as well to live longer. The Quran has addressed both through iman and saleh deeds, which take away all kinds of fear and grief. The important point to note is that just as by taking a pain-killing tablet, a headache disappears, this path has to be followed in order to benefit from the inner psychological change which is linked to human deeds. Next is, for example, about Jews, the Quran has stated they will never desire death because of what their hands have sent forward. And note over here, bima qaddamat aydihim. That means Quran says that if you send good forward after acquiring iman, then the fear of death will disappear. This is where understanding the law of requital and its functioning plays an important role. Fear is created by doubt and uncertainty, which are inner states of the human self. And by comparing death with our daily sleep, the Quran has put a spotlight on the link between our consciousness and our brain. It's worth going through this verse in chapter 39. Another fact is noted by the Quran, La yazukuna fiha al-mauta illa al-mautatal ula, that no further tasting of death after the first death. A lot to reflect. Again, look at the verses before and after this. It's very illuminating. Let us go to the next permanent value of justice, which is adl. Justice is also a permanent value, and no distinction is allowed between friend and foe. For says the Quran, and let not the hatred of a people incite you not to act equitably. Be just, that is nearer to observance of duty. As regards the course of justice, we have been very clearly guided by the Quran. Confound not truth and falsehood. Then Quran says, not knowingly conceal the truth. Hide not testimony. Evidence must be given truthfully. And be not ye an advocate for the fraudulent. And never be a supporter of the guilty. Be ye staunch in injustice, witnesses for Allah, even though it be against yourselves, or parents, or kindred, whether a rich man or a poor man. Allah is ever informed of what you do. And this also means that the system of Deen should be fully cognizant of what others are doing in terms of collecting evidence and doing justice to others. The verse concludes by saying, فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ خَبِيرًا. It will form part of the system, that the system will be aware of what others are doing and will be aware of it. And this does not mean becoming a police state, but people will understand the law of requital and they themselves will monitor their own self-development. Further elaboration of this permanent value, the Quran invites us to change our psyche within the guidance of these permanent values so that we can acquire a very high level of individual discernment where we become not only fully aware, but also in control of our thoughts, choices, and decision making. Creating conviction willingly for doing justice is the first phase on this path. In fact, it is the gross injustice within man-made systems which brings us onto this path. Crimes, according to the Quran, are not only those that are actually and physically committed, it considers even the mere thought of a breach and the permanent values as an offense. No doubt, such offenses do not fall within the jurisdiction of a court of law. Nevertheless, they are offenses in the eye of the law of requital and adversely affect the personality of the perpetrators. The Quran states, He knows the traitors of the eyes and that which the bosoms hide. We come to the last permanent value of today's presentation, ihsan, helping, restoring balance. Justice demands recompense and retribution, i.e., what is due to others is paid in it. But in ihsan, there is no question of retribution or payment, therefore the expectation of a return is contrary to this permanent value and a non-Quranic concept. It's worth looking at this root in Lugatul Quran. The Quran has stated, is there any reward for ihsan other than ihsan? That is, ihsan, doing good to others, in itself becomes its own reward. Acquiring knowledge about the issues created by the man-made systems also falls in the understanding of ihsan. Under these systems, wages are set by market forces which are under the control of the capitalists and elites. Ihsan comes from the root of husn, and which means adding beauty and balance to human life. They have no concern whether these wages meet the daily needs of the labor class or not. This means that through the manifestation of this permanent value, we feel the need for creating balance through the system of Deen, unlike man-made systems which are extremely exploitive. Even under the so-called social welfare systems, where adequate wages are not paid, some handouts are arranged by the state for these people, which results in a feeling of dependence and inadequacy, and this is against the permanent value of self-worth, respect, and dignity. If you remember, there has been some debate on minimum wage in the West as well. And people have to argue for that in order to get some kind of a reasonable minimum wage which can meet their minimum basic needs. Continuing on ihsan, where there is no so-called welfare aspect, as in the underdeveloped world, human beings become dependent on other mortals who somehow have acquired more under the capitalist system. And here the religious belief system plays an active role to an extent. These beliefs invite the people to help others in order to acquire a Jannat in the hereafter. The concept of Deen does not exist in these lands. The whole emphasis of the Quran is to create a system in which there are no yatim and miskeen, because it is against the human self and dignity and its respect. And the system is based on the permanent values with the concept of Allah, the existence of the life of the hereafter, and the law of requital playing a central role. The Quran has put justice and ihsan together in the initial phases of the establishment of the system of Deen. And that is important to keep in mind, that ultimately responsibility for meeting the needs of people lies on the system. That is the Jamaat-e-Mu'mineen, which runs the system on behalf of Allah in the light of the Quran. Indeed, Allah commands justice and the doing of ihsan. In order to understand balance, we need to acquire the ability to detect imbalance and recognize the psyche of those who create imbalances and also of those who fail to detect these. And it's very easy. Each one of us is a human being. We should ourselves figure out, even if we are very rich, we should ourselves figure out what is my basic need and why shouldn't I make an effort to make it possible that others also have their basic needs met. This includes those who are completely at ease with these imbalances and are part of the system of exploitation of fellow human beings, resulting in poverty and misery for those human beings. Continuing with ihsan, as quoted earlier, Quran says, Hal jazaa'ul ihsani illa ihsan. Is there any reward for ihsan other than ihsan? This means that by correcting the disturbed balance of someone, and that means we should first know that there is an imbalance in the society and others have an imbalanced life. The balance was restored, i.e. made an effort to create beauty, and beauty was created. Now what more does one expect from this in return? And this is not only applicable to physical needs, this is also applicable to cognitive aspects of human beings, where human beings, for example, feel isolated, depressed, anxiety, fear, all those things. If one expects some return of a greater kind, then that is not ihsan. This aspect falls under saleh deeds. where the whole effort is to create a self which comes to terms with the problems created by Iblisi systems. In this regard, the Quran directs, "Wala tamnun taksiru," nor expect in giving any increase. We should keep in mind that after the establishment of the Quranic system, this ihsan, that is restoring of balance, will be carried out by the system itself, which is responsible for the rububiyat of all members of the society. But until this system is established, this duty will need to be carried out via individuals, part of self-development of everyone. And this again will be organized by the system of Deen at an initial stages during the transitory phase. There will be clear instructions laid down for that. It will be the responsibility of the system to be aware of the physical and psychological issues of all human beings, and sub-clauses will need to be devised under this permanent value. Finally, the Taghuti word of 2024 and desire to create a new word under Deen. What I've done is I've taken this slide from one of our previous presentations. Here is the word of 2024. And the question we should ask is, am I happy with this word? And if the answer is no, then come to the Quran. If the answer is yes, then Quran is really not for me. If no, then look for an alternative. Man-made laws, limited choices, no hereafter. And that is the state of 2024. Life lived under relative values, differences among individuals and countries. Discrimination of race, color, gender, nationality, religion, language, we name it, everything exists. Fear plus grief plus uncertainty exists everywhere. Wars plus conflicts, poverty plus slavery. Rejecting Taghuti system after recognizing it and then accepting Iman in Allah, and it's a lofty choice, the Quranic choice for mankind. And this is what Quran has said, وَمَنْ يَكْفُرْ بِالطَّاغُوتِ وَيُؤْمِنْ بِاللَّهِ. Facing resistance and opposition from kufr, munafiqat, shirk, and kazab. And of course, there is an inner resistance as well. We see the opposition and then we start giving up or become distracted, or start saying, oh, it's a question of numbers. We don't have enough numbers. If we do this, then the numbers will increase. And we have seen that it is not the question of numbers. It is the question of changing our own psyche to become that moment, and then coming together so that we can get the help of Allah's laws. Creating a new word based on Deen, Iman in Allah plus hereafter, self-development under permanent values, direct rule of Allah via the Quran. That is, no man has the right to rule another human being. It has to be through the permanent values of the Quran. Rububiyat as a system. Higher aim of life, that is getting a new life, freedom from fear and grief. And then Quran says what will happen is وَأَشْرَقَتِ الْأَرْضُ بِنُورِ رَبِّهَا وَوُضِعَ الْكِتَابُ. The earth will shine with the nur of its Rabb. The book will be placed open. That is, everything will be decided according to the book of Allah. Thanks for your time and for sharing this today. Please feel free to share it with your contacts. You may like to subscribe for future talks related to the Quranic system of Deen.